Hi, welcome to the Rittner Floral School in Boston, Mass. I'm Dr. Steve Rittner, and it's a pleasure to welcome you into one of our classrooms today. We've got a neat little demonstration planned for you. I think you're going to really enjoy it. The topic of today's discussion is going to be container-based. Now, containers have a lot to do with what our floral designing is all about. And as floral designers, we play with many different kinds of containers. Perhaps you played with glassware. We love to play with some of our ceramic kind of containers. Then, of course, there's plastic, which gives interesting effects and can also have all kinds of finishes, almost feeling metallic, even though it happens to be plastic. There are many different kinds of bases that are out there that we play with. I grew up with things like plastic and ceramic and glassware, but we're playing with other things today, and some of the new choices that we have in terms of our bases and containers are really, really cool. And that's what we want to talk about in today's demonstration. What we're going to be showing you today is something that I think you're going to find really neat, something that can make your designing look very, very different and kind of cool. There's been a trend, and we see this, and it's coming really, really neat, with containers that have moss built into them. Moss built into them. In other words, containers that have a moss component in it. Some of these containers that have moss built into them are produced by a company called Supermoss. Supermoss makes some amazing things. They've got some reindeer moss. They have all kinds of great mosses out there. Things like our Spanish moss. We know it here at Rittner Floral as Stephen hair, because it kind of reminds me of my hair. They have things like sheet moss. They've got all kinds of neat kinds of moss materials available. Well, recently, the folks at Supermoss have also been coming up with some just amazing containers that are based on moss motifs. For example, something like this, which happens to be a purse, but it's a purse covered with moss. It has a liner in it, and we have designing in it. We have foam and so forth, but it's a purse that is simulated as a purse, but it's a great container totally covered with moss. The folks at Supermoss have come up with some just amazing products along this line, and we thought it would be fun to show some of these things to you today because they can transform your designing. You can come up with all kinds of neat things. For example, let's look at this. Here is a Supermoss container. Once again, it's got moss on one part of it, like this one. It's got a thin section of moss up here, and this simulates kind of a woven basket kind of thing. There is a liner built into it, and this kind of container looks very, very natural. It's very natural, it's very pretty, and you can come up with some absolutely amazing things in it. You'll notice this particular example is classical in terms of the designing, but very, very interesting in terms of the way our materials are placed. We have some carnations here, but not a standard carnation. These carnations have a real funky color. They almost look like some of the permanents that go back to the 19th century. We've got roses in here. We've got hydrangea. We have a few orchids. We have some green palms worked in here. We have a mixture of all kinds of fillered materials. And notice that by placing it into one of these containers from the folks at Supermoss that incorporate moss materials into it, it gives a whole different kind of feel to our design. Classical in terms of shape, and yet very, very with it in terms of the kind of style that people love these days. Here's another example, and our staff has been working full-time to come up with all kinds of cool stuff for you to see using some of these Supermoss containers. Another example of the same kind of idea, a Supermoss container, again using moss incorporated into the container, some woven materials as well. The top of the container, very, very contemporary in feeling. We have some of our gingers here. We have some of our mini sunflowers here. We have roses over on this side. We've got some of our little green palms here, some hydrangea worked in here, and a touch of some of our willow in the background. It gives a very, very contemporary, unique kind of flair to the design. It really is cool. And again, the choice of container sets the stage, sets the tone for this kind of thing, and gives a really, really cool effect. Let me show you another example of one of these kinds of things. Again, making use of some of these Supermoss containers. This one's a little bit bigger. And again, it's very, very pretty. Notice again, we've got quite a mixture of things. This one is a little larger, as you can see, exponentially larger than the last one. but it gives a really, really cool effect. And again, making use of the Supermoss containers that we have available to us, we've got all kinds of things in this design. We have some of our ginger. We have some of our Pseudocorum heliconia, along with our ginger in red and also in pink. We've got some of our zinnias here and here. We've got a mini sunflower, some of our roses, and then a nice melange mixture of all kinds of interesting things. This kind of designing is stuff that you could very, very easily use for so many different things. It would work well in somebody's home. It would work well on a mantle. It would work well in an entry area. These things are gorgeous. They give amazing value, and they absolutely look great. And you'll notice that, again, the use of some of these containers ties in so well stylistically with what we're doing here. Isn't that pretty? I think it's really, really neat. So coming up with some of these designs using containers that have moss embedded into them is something that you may want to consider, my viewer, to give your designing a little bit different look and to come up with some neat effects. Now, we've shown you designs that are kind of mass in style, showing lots and lots of stuff, and these are gorgeous. But while we're at it, let's get in something that's a little bit more linear as well, just so that you can get a sense for how you can do these things, because these designs are not hard to do. The container itself has a liner in it, and we've taken one of these Supermoss containers. We've got foam in it. It's already got a liner in it. It's just about ready to go. And let's actually make something up so you can see just how quick and easy it is to design using Supermoss materials. I'm going to start off with a little bit of my river cane or bamboo. You can see I've used a fairly large piece. When you use river cane or bamboo, it automatically means that the design is going to be fairly good size. And notice how high up that particular piece is coming. It really makes our design big before we add anything more to it. Let's play with some of our tropicals on this. You've seen some of the tropicals showing up in our other designs that we've shown. How about some of our heliconia? Heliconia, it's big, it's bold. It makes a statement, and when we use heliconia, immediately we know that this design is going to be somewhat important. Let's take Pseudocorum heliconia and work Pseudocorum heliconia into this as well. So I'm going to take another one of my heliconia, work it a little bit lower, and then using some of the pieces, we always find that in doing our designing, we have all kinds of pieces of stemming and so forth that sometimes falls on the floor. Let's take some of these pieces and work them into our design rather than throwing them out. They add texture, they add a little bit of substance to it, makes our designing interesting, doesn't it? And we had some of our ginger in the last design. Let's take some of our ginger and work some ginger flower into this as well. I'm going to take one piece and work it in on one side of the design, and then perhaps taking another piece, working it in onto the other side of our arrangement. And notice with two of our ginger, we have something that is very, very interesting and ties in very, very nicely with the height that we have using the heliconia and also with our bamboo. That's an interesting start. Now, as we're working on this, we notice that we do have a lot of air conditioning in here. And so let's deal with some of the air conditioning. We've taken some of our tie leaves and we've made little loops out of them, and I'm going to take a little tie leaf with a loop and I'm going to work it over here, and I'm going to work a second one in over here. This fills space, it creates repetitive motion in our design, and it creates an interesting kind of feel to our arrangement. Let's work a third one in. So I've got three of these all in a cluster over on one side using our tie leaves. Now let's see, what other mischief can we get into? I'm looking at the various things that we have available to us to play with, and we certainly have all kinds of other things in our design bucket that I can pull out. Well, you can't go wrong with this. Mini sunflower. People love sunflowers. It's a very, very happy flower. It makes people feel good. People love to look at them. So let's work a mini sunflower in here, and I'm going to work one over here. And then let's work closer in towards our focal area on this design. And I'm going to take a second mini sunflower and I'm going to work it in here. So I've got something coming down here, drawing our eye down in towards the focal point of our design. Now let's see, what other things do we have? Well, we've got some really neat summer materials and things available to us right now. How about some of our zinnias? And I'm going to take a zinnia, and I'm going to work one right over here. And I'm going to work another one right over in here. So we have a couple of our zinnia flowers in place here. That gives an interesting effect. And let's see, what else? Oh, here's one of my favorite materials. Of course, my students know that I say everything is my favorite material. This is some leucodendron. It is a really, really cool material. This was made available to us by Riccardi Wholesaler. They were nice enough to give it to us for use in this video. So we're going to work a little bit of leucodendron in. I'm going to kind of sneak it in between. I'll put a piece here. Let's work another piece over on that side. And then let's have one coming out over here. So that gives a really neat little activity going on here with our leucodendron. This is pretty. It gives a nice effect, but it does feel rather rigid because most of my flowers, with the exception of my ginger, which is giving me a gentle kind of crescent working here, most of the other things are pretty rigid. And so let's come up with a counterbalance to that. And to come up with a counterbalance to that, I am going to use some of my curly willow. So let's take some curly willow and we'll work some over here. And then let's take another little piece of curly willow. I love curly willow and branch material because they're a very, very quick and easy way to make our designs a little bit more fluid and to add some dynamism and movement motion through the use of some of our branchy stuff. Isn't that cool? I think that works very, very well. Now, to cover our mechanics, well, a lot of our flowers are already covering the mechanics, but let's come up with something that is cool. The folks at Supermoss, of course, are known for their mosses, and in addition to coming up with these containers, they do have some great moss materials. And so what I'm going to take is a little bit of my deer moss, my reindeer moss, and this stuff is really cool. It looks almost like a sponge. Isn't this stuff amazing? And I'm taking some of this and I'm deliberately using it in a kind of a braid, kind of light green, because that gives me a contrast. And I'm working some of this through the design, and I'm going to hairpin in place with some of my wire so that it stays for me. And now I have a very, very pretty arrangement making use of the Supermoss container, making use of some of the deer moss, and we have a nice mixture of a few things. We've got some heliconia, pseudocorum heliconia, regular heliconia, some river cane. We've got a couple of ginger. We've got some leaves that are worked over here, some tie leaves. We've got some leucodendron, a couple of zinnias, and we have a very, very pretty arrangement. So what do you think, my viewer? You've seen in this quick demo that we can go in many, many different directions. We can go in many different directions. We can play, of course, with things like our glassware. We can play with things like plastic. We can play with ceramic. But when you're considering your designing and you're looking for a slightly different look, I would very, very seriously consider some of the varieties of different moss-based kinds of containers that are out there, and the folks at Supermoss are really bringing in some very, very neat materials that we can play with to come up with designing that's a little bit different in feeling and really works so nicely for us. Well, we've worked very hard here at Rittner's Floral School to come up with something to show you. We hope you enjoyed this video. You can see these materials make our floral designing a lot of fun, and that's what it's all about. To design, to have fun, to make beautiful things, and to feel good about it, and to show it off to your family and friends and have a great time. On behalf of all of us here at Rittner's Floral School, I'm Dr. Steve Rittner. Thank you so much for coming in and visiting with us today. We hope to see you again real soon. Thank you.